Hi, in this one we're going to map the staccato and pizzicato samples. I'm going to teach you how to use the auto mapping features in HISE. So if we go to the project folder and we go to the samples folder, we have the pizzicato and staccato samples in two separate folders. And if we go into our project and just click to open the sampler workspace, we can see a mapping editor here. I'm just going to close up this top view here just so we can focus on the mapping window for now. And as you can see, it says drop samples or sample maps from the browser. That means from your file browser. You can also right click in here to select import samples as well, but I'm going to use the drag and drop method. So the first way I could do this is just open the file in my file browser, press Ctrl and A, might be Command A on a Mac to select all the files, then I could click and drag them across. And that's actually how I work usually. But for some people, it's actually easier to stay in HISE and just go to the project directory tab up here. And here we can see all of the files and folders within our project folder. So this is an alternative to opening the system file browser. And here's the samples folder. And let's start with the staccato. I usually do it from my file browser because I find I can navigate that more quickly and I can use keyboard shortcuts and things like that. But for this video, we'll do it from here. So I'm going to drag these across and we can see HISE sort of gives us a preview of where they're going to land if I was to just release the mouse. And if I move my mouse down, the samples are spread over fewer keys. If I raise it up, each sample gets spread over 2 keys. I don't know if we can get, yeah, there we go. Keep going and I'll just spread them over more keys. And in this case, it doesn't actually matter because we're going to use the automapper. But for a simple sample set, you might just want to drag and drop them in like this and determine the placement using the mouse. So when I release the mouse, we get the automapper window pop up. So if we were to leave this on the default value, which is drop point, and I was to click OK, HISE would just map the samples to where you can see them here in this preview. And in fact, let's just do that just so you can see it. So I'll hit OK. And there's all the samples mapped. And we definitely don't want them mapped this way because we need to sort out the dynamics and the round robins, but that's just kind of the default behavior. So I'm going to press Ctrl and A to select all of these, and then I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard. So we're back to a fresh template. Another way to do that is to right click and select new sample map, and that will also clear it out. So we'll go back to dragging and dropping, and we're actually going to go with this one, file name token parser, and then we're going to hit OK. And this is where it becomes important to have a good file naming structure. So my file name, let's go over here, we can see it, is rustic violin, so the name of the instrument, underscore then staccato, the name of the articulation, underscore 55, the note number, underscore dynamic 1, the dynamic, underscore RR1, and that's the round robin number. So the underscores are important, and I recommend you use underscores to separate the bits of your file names. And you can see here that it says in the mapping window, separator, and it's got an underscore in there by default. You can click this help button to find out a little more about that. And this will split up the file name based on the separator, so underscores, and give us these individual tokens which we can use to tell HISE how to map the samples. So the first part is the instrument name, rustic violin. I'm just going to leave that on ignore. Staccato, I'm going to leave that on ignore. And the next part is the note number. So this part I'm interested in. So from the property drop down, I'm going to select single key. And then in the data type, I'm going to select number. So there are a few, so if you're using note names, which I recommend you avoid, you would leave this on note name, and HISE would use the note name to map the samples to those notes. But I'm going to select number. Now the next one is the dynamic. So for the property, I'm going to select velocity spread. And there are a few choices for velocity. If you've got a fixed velocity value, you could use this. If you've got a velocity range, you can use this one. I'm using velocity spread because I want to spread the sample over multiple velocities. And for the data type, we can see that the token isn't just a number, it's dynamic 1, so it's got a word in there. So what we do is we go to the data type and we select custom, and HISE automatically figures out that dynamic 1 and dynamic 2 should be values 1 and 2. So it extracts the number from the name of the token, which is a really nice feature. And for the last one, we're going to select RR group, and it's automatically set it to custom, and it's automatically figured out what the grouping should be. And round robin groups in HISE start from 1, so I recommend you always start yours from 1 as well. In most cases, as I mentioned before, I would start numbering things from 0, but this is one of those exceptions. And now we just hit OK. And HISE says the amount of round robin groups has changed because by default there was 1 and now we've told it to have 2. So it asks if we want to adjust the amount of groups. We do because we want it to match our round robins. So we'll just hit OK. So now HISE has mapped the samples. So here are the lower dynamics, dynamic 1. Here are the upper dynamics. We've got these gaps in between because I've only sampled every, I think, third note. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all of them. And we're going to come up here where we've got this button where it says fill note gaps in sample map. We're going to click that and that just fills in the gap. So we just need to select these ones at the end here and we're going to come down where it says high key. We're just going to increase that so that matches the rest of the notes. The next thing to do is to save our sample map. So we're going to come up here and click the floppy disk icon and that opens in our project sample maps folder and we're just going to give this a name. So I'm going to call it staccato.xml. You don't always need to add the XML extension, it depends on the operating system you're using. On Windows and Mac, that will be added automatically. Okay, so now this is saved, and if we open the sample maps folder in our project directory, we can see there's our sample map, staccato.xml, and we can see it in the file browser as well. If we go to the sample maps folder, and there it is. So we've mapped 2 dynamics, we can see those here, but where are the 2 round robins? Well, they are in different groups, and we can see up here it says round robin RR1 of 2. And if we were to click on this, we can actually set a different amount of groups if we wanted more or fewer groups. So to view the group, we use these 2 little circles here. So we can click on the first one, we're viewing the first group, we click on the second one, and now we're viewing the second group. And just to sort of make that clear, I'm just going to drag this one over here, and now we'll go back to the first group, and back to the second group, so you can see we're switching between the groups. If you want to move samples to different groups, you can just adjust them here with the RR group value. And when you have a lot of groups, I've had some instruments with like 20, 30, 40 groups. These little circles don't all fit along here, you soon run out of room. And the solution that we have is you right click on the groups and you'll get a little pop-up menu and this will show all of the groups. So even if they're not all available here, you'll be able to access them all by right clicking. To select all groups at once, just click on one of the groups so it has a little square box around it, and then click again, and it will select all of the groups. You can also access that from the right-click menu by selecting Show All Groups. So we've got the round robin group, we've got the root note, which is actually represented on the keyboard down here by these green keys when we highlight the notes anywhere. And if we come up here, we can zoom in on that a bit so we can see that more clearly. So these green keys. We've got the low key and the high key value, we have the low velocity value and the high velocity value, and then this num quarters thing that's used with time stretching, so we're not going to be using that today. On the right here we have the sampler table, and this just shows us what's in our sample map, but just in a table format. So we can see all of the samples, again we can see the root note, the low note, the high note, that kind of thing. And you can type in the search bar if you want to find a particular one, so if I wanted dynamic 2 for example, I could hit enter, and now all the dynamic 2 samples are selected in both groups. Or I could put maybe RR1, so now it's going to select all the samples in round robin group 1. So it's quite good for selecting groups of samples so you can edit them in bulk. Now one thing it's going to be nice to add to our staccato sample map is a crossfade based on velocity. So let me show you how we do that. So the first thing we do is we need to overlap the samples on the velocity range. So I'm going to have them overlap by about 20 below, 20 up, so 40 in total. So I've selected the upper dynamic and I'm going to change the low velocity from 64 to 44. And then I'm going to select the lower dynamic and I'm going to change the high velocity from 63 to 83. By the way, you can right click on these to pull up little sliders which allow you to move these in larger increments more quickly. And this works for all of these. Let me set that back to 83. Okay, the next thing is to make a crossfade area on here. So to do that, we're going to enable this button here, which allows us to add velocity crossfades. And when I click this, watch down here, so you can see it now says lower velocity X fade, upper velocity X fade. So that's where it was saying low key and high key before. So what we can do now is select these upper ones and set the lower velocity X fade to 40. And we can select the lower ones and set the upper velocity X fade to 40. Let's zoom in on that. So now we get a bit of a visual representation of our crossfade areas, and HISE will handle this volume crossfade between the samples automatically, which is really nice. Let's save this. So when you're laying things out in your sample map, it can be sometimes a good idea to lock a particular group so you're only hearing the samples in that particular group while you're testing things and auditioning them. To do that, right-click and select Lock RR Group, and it will give you whichever round robin group is currently active. And the way you tell which one is active is by the circles up here, so you can see the first group has the inner circle filled, so that means group 1 is active, so we get to see RR group 1 there. To progress to the next group, we just play a note. And now group 2 is active, so we'll see that here. So we can lock to round robin group 2. You can also lock the velocity. Depending on where you right click, it will give you different velocity values to lock to. So I could lock it at velocity 115 and lock it to round robin group 2. And then no matter what velocity I play at, it's going to play it at this velocity and this round robin group. So that's really useful when you're auditioning your samples and testing things out. Okay, let's save our sample map again. And let's just hear the different velocity levels we've got. So actually I'm going to lock to group 1, so let's go to group 1. And let's lock the group. So now if I play, the group isn't going to change up here. And we can see the lock icon is active. So I'm going to play a series of velocities starting at the top of the key, and I'm going to go down. So it's going to start at a low velocity and go higher. And we should see a little green bar in here that represents the note I'm playing and the velocity level. So there we go, that's the little green bar just appears here. So we'll start with a low velocity. And we'll get a bit higher. And now we're getting into the crossfade area. Okay, so that crossfade sounded pretty smooth. And did you hear that the volume got louder? So low velocity, nice and quiet, and high velocity, much louder. You can also see it on the meters up here. We need to adjust the envelope slightly. You can hear it's kind of cutting off a bit. But that's okay, that's just because of the envelope settings. So the volume change is not because of the samples. These samples have actually been normalized, so they're actually the same volume. And we can see that if we open the waveform view, if I click on a sample, we can see they have a decent volume level. Okay, so there isn't a huge difference in volume between the lower dynamic and the upper dynamic. But we are hearing a difference when we play them back. The reason we hear a difference is because in the module tree, we added a velocity modulator, gain velocity. So we are modulating the gain based on velocity. If we bypass this, and now I play a low velocity, the volume is pretty much the same as the higher velocity. So if you want velocity to control the volume of your sampler, you need to have a velocity modulator in the gain section of the sampler. And the intensity slider just controls how much the velocity is affecting the gain. And of course you can adjust the curve in this table as well to tweak that even further. So let's save our sample map one more time. And now we're going to map the pizzicato sample. So we'll right click in here and select new sample map. We should probably also unlock the round robin groups. And now let's drag our pizzicato samples in. We'll select the file name token parser, hit OK. And because I use the same naming convention for both the staccato and the pizzicato, I don't need to change anything in here because HISE remembers the last settings I used. So I can just hit OK. And HISE has made a little mistake here. It's just a weird glitch, I guess, because it's saying that the old amount of round robin groups was 2. Do we want to change it to 1? No, we don't, so I'm going to click cancel here, but that's just something to keep an eye out for. So let's just make sure it has mapped them correctly. Yes, it has mapped them correctly there. And we can see the samples are in group 1 and group 2. So just be sure to check that little message when it pops up, just in case it glitches on you as well. Okay, so let's select all of the samples and change the spread, and then just adjust these end ones manually. Oh, we need to turn off the crossfade there. There we go. And we'll apply the crossfade now, exactly the same as we did for the staccato. Okay, and let's save this sample map. So the sample map system is great because now we've got pizzicato and staccato, and we can just load whichever ones we want into whichever samplers. And in fact, this is sampler 1, so I'm going to load the staccatos in here. And in sampler 2, and I'm just clicking this little button here to open the sampler 2 workspace, I'm going to select pizzicato. Let's save our project. I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-S. And that will just save the XML for our project. And that XML will store which sample maps we've loaded into each sampler. Okay, let's open the samplers in the big view like this. And we actually, in addition to getting a little mapping editor here, we get a few things in the body section of the sampler. And the one I'm interested in right now is the sampler settings. So the sampler settings are very useful. They allow us to set the buffer size and preload size. You can see that here. And these values will affect RAM usage. And we can see how much memory is currently being used by the sample map here. So if I change the buffer size, let's half it to 2048. And you should make sure that the buffer size is a value that's a power of 2. So if I do that, it doesn't change the memory usage. Let's change the preload size. And the memory usage has halved when I half the preload size. Now you might not always want to do that. It depends on the system you're planning to run this on, if you've got SSDs or if you're using hard drives and that kind of thing. A good way to reduce the CPU cost of each sampler is to set the voice limits to whatever you think the maximum is going to be. So if you think somebody's not going to be playing more than 10 notes at the same time, then set this to 10. Usually you want to add a little bit extra than whatever you think the maximum will be, because there's going to be decay and tail time and stuff like that while notes fade out. So I would set this maybe to 64 for this one. And the soft limit, that can usually be half of the full amount. So I'll set that to 32, and I'll leave the fade time where it is. Over here we can set the number of RR groups again. That does exactly the same as clicking on this button here, so we don't need to play with that. Group XF, this is for samples where you want to crossfade them dynamically, and we're going to look at that shortly with the sustain samples. And the same with this edit XF setting as well. Pitch tracking determines if stretching a sample across multiple notes will also adjust the pitch. Usually you want to have that enabled, but you can disable it if you want. Retrigger mode determines what happens when you play the same note multiple times. Usually you want to kill the duplicates and they'll be faded out based on the envelope you're using. And playback mode lets you choose between normal one-shot, reversed, or reverse one-shot. There are some time stretching options here, but at the time of recording this video, the time stretching is a little bit unreliable in HISE, so I wouldn't use these in a real project just yet. But by all means go in and play with the time stretching settings and read the documentation, and hopefully in the not too distant future they'll be usable in a real world project. Okay, so that's it for this video. We've mapped the staccato samples, we've mapped the pizzicato samples. In the next video we're going to map the sustain samples and set up some dynamic crossfading. So head over to that one and I'll see you there.